Guys, so let's talk about this. Brian Pillman Jr. made a comment on Twitter that I thought was very interesting, considering I'm actually spending a lot of time watching the 1980s Mid South wrestling. So I've just literally just watched like 8 episodes of Mid South, and I go on Twitter and then I see that he had Brian Pillman Jr. has a hot take. So I kind of want to talk about it and talk about the differences that I've noticed. And this is my first time watching Mid South. Plus, I've also watched a lot of Smoky Mountain. I watched a lot of World Class. I watched a lot of different things. But I was just happen to be watching Mid South right now, so I'm probably going to be talking about that mostly. But this is what he said. Hot take. Modern wrestling is actually better in a lot of ways than the old stuff. We often look back at the past with rose-colored goggles, but if you actually watch, a lot of things at the top level are smoother, faster, and more exciting than they were 30 years ago. I think the wrestling today is geared towards a more savvy fan base. It may be harder to digest than your good old classic babyface heel match from the 1980s, but at the highest level, there does exist complex storytelling and psychology. And I don't completely disagree with this. I think that, but I think we need to break it down a little bit, because there's a lot of different things that we're talking about here. I think at the highest point, the major difference between the 1980s and today is technology. The technology requires a lot more things of today than they did in the past. Now, this is what I mean. Wrestling is not a wrestling show; it's a TV show now, and this is for everything: Dynamite, Impact. Well, maybe not ROH because they don't really have a TV show, but and maybe New Japan, it doesn't really count for them either. But in the 80s, wrestling wasn't a TV show. It was a wrestling show. It was a quilted patchwork of different matches some were taped in a studio, others were taped at house shows. You could clearly see when they edited things, and this is just not just on Mid South, but at other programs. So you could clearly see that the audience is different. The reactions are different. It's placed in the middle, like a main event where you place like third match into the middle of the show. And it was just like, hey, it was the TV show, the Mid South or whatever TV show, Superstars or whatever, was geared toward pushing house show business. So you would have, they would say, oh, we're going to have this match on TV, but whether you watched it or not on TV didn't really make much of a difference. They wanted you to come to the show when they did the various shows throughout the week. Now, Raw is sort of the destination. SmackDown is sort of the destination. The TV show is sort of the point. Everybody who sits around and watches TV. They don't really. I mean, WWE still run house shows. AEW doesn't run house shows at all. I don't think Impact does house shows. And I'm pretty sure ROH doesn't do house shows. So house shows is pretty much a dead business, and that's one of the major things that because wrestling now is a TV show, things are produced differently. And you can tell when, when things are a patchwork and not produced all at one time. But you also have the lighting. You'll have in these wrestling promotions, you'll have, like, when you watch like an old wrestling show, it's almost always dimly lit. And it looks like it's taking place in a speakeasy in the 1920s. It's almost always like smoky, and it's like, what the fuck is going on, really? Like, it's not brightly lit like it is today. Like, even the only shows that really don't light their product properly nowadays is Ring of Honor. Even Impact gets some decent lighting on the program, but the lighting was shit in the 80s because it didn't matter. As long as you could see the ring, it didn't really matter. They didn't do, they didn't pan the audience, and there was not a lot of that stuff. There was a lot of fan engagement, sure, but it was a wrestling show, was about the wrestling. There was, minimal promos, minimal promo time, and things like that. But today, they're selling so many different things, T-shirts and video games and action figures and the wrestlers' Twitter accounts and all that other stuff. That sort of made the necessary changes visually when you're sitting down watching a wrestling show. But he's talking about the athleticism, and I think I still take to my concept of technology, because I think, and I was told that World Class sort of created this concept of zooming in on wrestlers' faces and really getting into their emotions and how they are selling and what they look like in the match, and being able to pick up things that are said because the microphones are closer to them. And that's one of the biggest differences between now and then, because the microphones are constantly, because the technology is so close now. HD TVs and all that stuff. We pick up everything. We can hear guys calling it in the ring. We can see if a guy's not really selling things visually. We can see people clearly missing knee strikes, or if a punch is not landing correctly. We can clearly see it, like last year with the Dark Order segment where the guy was clearly not making any contact with Dustin. We could clearly see that. We probably wouldn't have seen that in the 1980s. It could have been the same thing, but we wouldn't have seen it because the camera wouldn't have zoomed in so close. We wouldn't have saw it. So it kind of means that we have to do things differently. And because you have to do things differently, guys have to visually sell more. They have to act more. So they have to, sell the pain in their faces and their knees, backs, or whatever, a lot more. And so when he says that complex storytelling and psychology exists, that's what he means. It is on a different level, because it has to be, because the TV is produced differently. You understand what I'm saying? So because you can't get away with, half-ass selling on TV anymore because the camera is so far away, now the camera is in your face almost all the goddamn time. You have to sell, you have to make noise because there's microphones and things like that. If somebody's wrenching on your knee, you was like, as opposed to in the 80s, you might go, and reach for the ropes and stuff like that. But you have to do all of that now. You can't just be, it kind of cuts out the laziness. But let's talk about another thing. We talked about storytelling. I just talked about selling and your verbals, and talking during the match is another thing that's really different. Is that now people are more verbal. They're talking more, talking down to their opponent, doing a lot of the heel stuff, slapping people when they're on the ground, kicking them. Like that stuff is a lot more prevalent now. And it's not as prevalent on the indies because everybody knows everybody is friends. And we'll get to that. We'll get to that part later. The fact that everybody knows that it's a show, which he says when Brian Pillman Jr. says, I think wrestling today is geared more towards a more savvy fan base. That's what he means. He just means that the smarts, all the people who just know it's not real and are just enjoying the show because they know it's a show and all that type of stuff, as opposed to in the 80s where everybody was like, especially in 82 when people were kind of like, I don't know if it's real or not. I don't know, But that's what he means. But another thing that he said that I thought was interesting is he talked about things being smooth and faster. This is also true. I think if you watch a match from the 80s, which I've been watching a lot of matches from the 80s, they were kind of smooth, but they were slower. It was more deliberate. One match sticks into my mind was Mr. Olympia versus Paul Orndorff. And just as an aside, when I was watching this match, I was like, who the hell is Mr. Olympia? And I was thinking about it. And I was like, maybe I should Google it. Then I was like, you know what? It's more fun if I don't Google it. You know what I'm saying? Like, I enjoy not knowing things. So I get to go back and be completely ignorant, because 1982 was before I was even born. And then I didn't grow up watching Mid-South because I grew up in Detroit. So all the tricks and who everybody is a surprise to me. So I don't feel the need to go back and, look up Bob Roop and, do my Googles and all that type of stuff. I'm good with only knowing the stuff that they told me on the screen. So, but when you look at things as far as being smooth, it's like, yes, they do power slams and body slams a lot more. They're a lot smoother today because they're faster. But because they do things faster today, there's a lot more sloppiness today. A lot more people are blowing spots, injuring themselves. There's people who are trying to do like overly complex finishing holds. And, and when you say like things are smoother, it's like, well, no, in the past, things were smooth because they were simple. With body slams, an elbow drop. A dude would beat you with a sleeper. That was Mr. Olympia's finish. He gets you in a sleeper and that's it. I haven't seen anybody get out of that sleeper hold yet. So, and I'm like 8 weeks in, I think. I ain't seen nobody get out of that sleeper hold yet. But, that's what I think of. So I'm not sure, like, in what way is it smoother? Like, I think that, people are better athletes today, and we'll get to that in a minute. But I don't know if it's smoother as far as their transitions, because there's some smooth guys. Okada is pretty smooth today. Randy Orton is pretty smooth, but they don't work super fast either. Like there are guys today who work like Dolph Ziggler. He works really fast, and other people work really fast. The cruiserweights and smaller guys, but they fuck up a lot. So is it really smoother if they just work fast and they're athletic, but they're botching a lot, where they have to, either they're dropping each other, or people are just waiting for somebody to jump over on top of them. It's like, is that really smooth? It's like, no, if I can see that you're just waiting for somebody to jump, that's not really smooth. And what I say is, that's like everybody know when a stew is made correctly, it tastes good. But when a stew is wrong if you bite into it and it's raw fucking potatoes. And that's what fake shit is to me. If I see something that's obviously bullshit, like you throw a punch that don't make any fucking contact, or you throw a knee and there's no fucking contact made, that's a raw potato in this stew that you've made. That's a raw fucking carrot that I just bitten into. Like it's impossible for me to take you seriously. Now it's completely different if I already know it's bullshit from the beginning. This is the Firefly Funhouse match concept. If you shit me into another fucking universe where nothing makes sense and you've edited the fuck out of this match, I'm not going to take anything that's in it seriously anyway. But if you try to tell me that this is going to be some knockdown, drag out brawl, and I see that you've taken a bump before the clothesline even made contact, that's bullshit. You know what I'm saying? I'm like, like, But this kind of goes into another thing. But let's get into it. So athletically, there's a lot more high spots. There's a lot more people jumping off the top rope. There's a lot more people doing super moonsaults and double moonsaults and all that shit. And there was, I remember clearly when Christopher Daniels in AEW tried to do a moonsault and he just couldn't get up and he flopped and fell on his back. And I laughed. But honestly, I was sad too, because I was like, he shouldn't, at 50 years old, he shouldn't still be trying to do that. He should have developed a different move set by now that has advanced with his age, because you never would have seen guys do that in the past. Out of these 8 weeks that I've seen, or these 8 episodes of Mid-South Wrestling that I've seen, I saw 2 people come off the top rope. One, well, not even off the top rope, off the second rope. One was Andre the fucking Giant. Believe it or not, I saw Andre the Giant jump off the second rope. It was a 6-man tag. It was Alpha and Sika, the Wild Samoans, teaming with Big Cat Erdy Ladd versus Dusty Rhodes, Andre the Giant, and the Junkyard Dog. And Andre the Giant jumped off the second rope. And it obviously was the fucking finish, right? So Andre jumped off the second rope. And in another match, I saw, I think it was Alpha from the Wild Samoans jumped off the second rope. It might have been a flying headbutt from the second rope. But those were like the highest high spots. Now you got guys just doing some of everything. You got fucking Lance Archer, who's like 6'9", and he's doing like he's walking like, of course the Undertaker is walking. They're doing the old school thing, but you got Jake Atlas doing cartwheels off the top rope. And like, yeah, these guys are athletically more inclined than they were in the past, but we don't know if those guys were athletically more inclined because they never really thought to do that shit. They kept it simple, punches, kicks, slams. Very simple slams. There was a lot more cheating. Heels being heels, not trying to be cool. They worked a lot more as far as they engaged with the audience, even though the audience was smaller. And I've heard people in interviews say it's easier to engage with smaller audiences than big ones. This is why guys have these problems when they go to the WWE and there's this like a bigger audience and they really only interact with like the first row, because that's really all they kind of used to is like 2,000, 3,000 people in the building. It's very different when there's 15,000 or 20,000 people in the building. And when you watch the territories, you see that difference where they'll interact with the first 2 rows of people. But that's all there is anyway. It's the first row or 2 rows of people. There's not, a wave of people in the back. So they didn't really need to work as hard as guys do today. And that's a positive and it's a negative. But there's faster movement, obviously. But like I said, it goes back to, so what if it's faster? If it's shit, if everybody's doing a Canadian Destroyer, then what is it? What does it mean? And these also, these overly complicated finishes where guys need help to do his finish. Back in the past, like I saw a Samoan drop actually is look like a dope finish. Like I saw that was a Wild Samoans finish. They used to do the Samoan drop, and I was thinking like I've seen Samoan drops done 100 times. I've seen everybody. I've even seen every Samoan do a Samoan drop. I've seen Ken Kennedy do what was the Green Bay plunge, where it's a Samoan drop over the top rope. You know, the rolling Samoan drop. Sheamus used to also do it, but for some reason, when Alpha and Sika do a Samoan drop, I believe it. It's like when Yokozuna used to do a Samoan drop. It's like, yeah, he shouldn't get up from that. But for some reason, I didn't have the same reaction when I saw Roman Reigns do a Samoan drop. I didn't have the same feeling like, oh, you know, that's it, that's the finish. You know, as opposed to when I was watching it. And it's something a little bit more, I don't know, believable about it. You know, they look smaller on the screen because the camera is so far away. But their stuff looked a lot more snug. And that's what it's going to as far as toughness. I think this is the big difference, is that guys in the past worked a lot snugger, a lot tougher. You know, they actually if they were not making contact, the camera could not see it. You know, the camera could not pick it up. So they weren't tearing each other's heads off, but you couldn't pick it up. So it looked like they were really beating the hell out of each other because the camera was so far away. Now the camera is so close that if you work in light, they can see it, you know. And then in the empty arena shows that are happening now, because this is being recorded during the pandemic, you don't hear any contact, you know, like, so you don't even hear any contact. They don't do the stumps anymore. Like, that was one big thing that I kind of noticed, that I kind of missed about wrestling, and is, you know, guys who stump when they punch, you know, like people don't do that anymore. So, or they very rarely do it. So that's kind of a major thing with me, is that guys felt and looked like they were tougher back then. You know, a lot of guys, when you listen to the commentary, they'll talk about their football background. A lot of these guys played football, right? Or they were shooters, wrestling shooters, like they were collegiate wrestlers or something like that. So they would really big that up. They don't really do that today. Today they're so worried about the guy's character that they don't really talk about anything that might be grounded in reality, you know, or it's very rarely brought up. Like, they might bring up that Roman Reigns played football. It's offhand. Like, but when you look at wrestling in the 80s, specifically in Mid-South, it's like every other guy was a football player. So Bill Watts would just go on and on and on about this guy playing football, and he would really tout the guy's toughness, his integrity, his virtues, things like that. And sometimes it would come across being really odd. You know, you might get one of those potatoes in the stew. Case in point, he was talking about Mr. Olympia in one match. And again, I don't know who Mr. Olympia is, but he was talking about Mr. Olympia working injured. He talked about, like, all these guys work injured, blah, 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 blah. And then he goes off and he says, like, you know, sometimes these guys, you know, they get hurt in the workplace, and they go and start collecting unemployment benefits, or they start collecting workman's comp, but not these guys. You know, he's kind of like, wow, where did that come from? But it's like, like, is he talking about the guy who you know, got 4 of his fingers cut off with a handsaw? Like, no, you're not talking about that guy. He's talking about some of these guys out here who get, you know, a little back injury and, oh, I'm not going to work tomorrow. You're like, these wrestlers, they're tough guys. They get hurt and they show up the next day. And to some degree, that you kind of get a sense of that, but they really don't do that much of that today. Like, nobody talked about how tough Rey Mysterio had to be to get thrown off a fucking roof and then appear on Raw the next night. You know, it was a lot of, well, I guess getting thrown off the roof wasn't shit because he showed up the next night. And nobody said, like, Rey, what a tough bastard. He got thrown off of a roof yesterday and now he's back today. What a tough guy. No, they didn't do any of that shit. They just kind of just blew it off like, oh yeah, man, I got thrown off the roof, man. Like, that sucked, bro. But I'm back here tonight. It's like, what the hell? Like, talk about, like, I thought I was going to die because I didn't know it was a second roof over there. You know, but I'm back because I'm going to kick his ass for throwing me off that roof. That tough guy spirit is much, much different today. You know, the ballsiness of it. Even though we know you're working, we don't understand, like, how much difference it takes for when you see a guy like Ernie Ladd, who is, like, legit a giant. He's like 6'9" or something like that. He's like a massive individual. And he gets jumped by Skandar Akbar and the Wild Samoans, and they did like a flying. Oh yeah, I saw one of them. Somebody. I don't know who the fat guy is. We haven't revealed who that guy is yet. That's why, you know. But I forgot now that I remember. He jumped off the top rope and did a knee smash on Ernie Ladd's knee. I think it was off the second rope, might have been off the top rope. I'm not sure. But Ernie Ladd's on the ground like ah. But this guy is like huge. Like this guy's like a big rotund, almost like Earthquake's body type of dude. And you kind of sit there looking like, I can believe that. I can believe that if a fat guy jumped off the top rope and landed on my knee, no matter what my size is, my knee is fucked and I'm not getting up. So, and he was fighting these guys off for a while. Like you got Ernie Ladd fighting off 3 people. 2 of them are like 2 giant Samoans, and he's beating their ass. I would have to go into why this happened. Ernie Ladd was the manager of the Wild Samoans. They were about to get a world tag team title shot or a tag team title match, not the world, because they were part of the NWA, and NWA was like, But Skandar Akbar, who was the manager for the Iron Sheik took off. Iron Sheik disappeared. Now he was taking over as the manager of the Wild Samoans, and Ernie Ladd didn't like that, so he decided he's going to beat everybody up. So he went in there and beat them all up. And then a third guy, or fourth guy rather, came in and he jumped Ernie Ladd from behind it. He did the big knee on the top rope knee on the knee, and Ernie Ladd's been hurt ever since, as far as the canon of the show, as far as I've seen it so far. Don't spoil it in the comment section. But that sort of toughness is what's missing in wrestling today. And I see what Jim Cornette was talking about. He says that, sometimes guys get beaten up and the beat down takes too long. Like, because I've seen, like, when people get jumped in matches, you will quickly see another babyface run out there to run the guys off. It would be literally 30 seconds. They might get 4 or 5 kicks in, some stomps or whatever, and then here comes another babyface to stop the beat down. And it's like, yes, it is tough to be able to withstand a beating, but at the same time, it does kind of cross over into the cartoonish, where like, how badly can you really beat up a guy? If you're beating on him for 10 minutes and he gets back up, you kind of have to say, like, what really, is he just tough or you just whack as fuck as far as, your ability to beat people up. But that to me is the major difference. As I see that wrestling in the past seemed to be more geared towards showing that guys are tough, telling me that both the baby faces and the heels are tough guys, that the tough guys, as far as the heels are concerned, are cheaters. So the baby faces are even tougher because they have to deal with not just, basic things like getting clotheslined and body slams, but they also have to deal with guys trying to throw fire in their face and trying to power drive them on steel stairs and all type of crazy shit, right? And these things will legitimately put you out as far as injuries are concerned. And you also had babyface that seemed like they made more sense. They were smarter. But, one example is Paul Orndorff was trying to become the referee of a match between Ted DiBiase and some other guy. I forget who the other guy is. But he had been feuding with Ted DiBiase, and he was trying to become the referee of this match. And Ted DiBiase just said, look, if you're the referee, I'm out of here. Today they would probably been like, oh, you're the ref? Okay, but you better not screw with me, dude. Ted DiBiase was like, nah, I'm not. If you're the referee, I'm out of here, dude, because you can't be fair. You're not fair. So, yes, you have the smarter babyface. Things made more sense than back then than they do now, where you have guys who every guy think that he's Teflon. It doesn't make much sense. But speaking of Ted DiBiase, and this is another major difference that I've noticed, is that you can see that there are some charisma, certain characters within certain people that you watch, and it feels some subdued, because of the body types of everybody in the past. Just imagine Greg the Hammer Valentine into your mind. Okay, what was he? Sort of shaped like an onion. Look, his tights look like he's wearing diapers. He had the blonde hair. And then times him by 500, and that's like most of wrestlers in the 80s. Almost all of them are shaped like Greg the Hammer Valentine. So it's a surprise really when you see people who are not shaped like that. So when you see like a Paul Orndorff who is not shaped like Greg the Hammer Valentine, it's kind of a surprise. But ultimately, that sort of vision, that sort of concept of what a wrestler looks like, was so prevalent in the 80s. It's not prevalent at all today. Like the body types of the performers, like you can, like when you're used to seeing guys that look like Seth Rollins or look like Dolph Ziggler, and yes, a lot of these guys are smaller now, they're in better shape, but it makes it so obvious when you see a Joey Janela. They become like the raw tomato in not the raw tomato, but the raw potato in the stew. When you see Joey Janela come out, and it just looks like, you know, somebody stacked some mashed potatoes inside of a pair of tights, you're like, what the fuck, you know, like that. So, but it was the reverse when you go into the 80s and you see a bunch of Bob Roops and a bunch of Greg Valentines, and then here comes Paul Orndorff, who looks like he's tanned. He's like he just left the gym. He's vascular, you know. He's a big guy, you know. Those cut dudes, and then when you get to like to the 90s and like Ultimate Warrior is like the dude. He's built like a, you know, like a video game character, like a straight up comic book. Like, you know, if you've seen certain characters from the comic books like Wolverine and shit, like they look like, you know, the Ultimate Warrior. Like he's just cut to shreds, you know. But it wasn't like that for everybody. Like that was a rare thing. But now that's kind of like the Warrior is just huge, absolutely huge. Like he would be a phenomenon today. But guys being cut and smooth and in shape, you know, is very different. And I think that actually says a lot about the way that people worked, because guys were kind of, again, shaped like what's that? I'm thinking shaped like eggplants and shit like that, where you had the skinny arms, but you had like the fat body, you know, and the Dusty Rhodes look. Because so many guys were shaped like that and built like that, you know, that became sort of the norm. And that was sort of the norm. And their charisma had to, you know, overcome that. They had to be so charismatic that, you know, to get over being chubby and shit like that. Where today, you know, guys can't get over just being cut up anymore, because we've seen this for 20, 30 years of guys just walking around like, you know, muscular bodybuilding types. But back then it was different. But you also had the verbal charisma, your Dusty Rhodes. But I'm going around a circle trying to get to the point. The point is, there was something about Ted DiBiase then in 1982, but it felt subdued. It felt like, you know, he was around all of these guys, and all of these guys were the same. You know, everybody just wore basic trunks, basic knee pads, basic boots. There was not a lot of dynamism in how they looked. And then when you could tell, as you know, as the business kind of went forward, you started seeing more colorful performers. You know, you started seeing Sting and the Warrior, and you started seeing guys like Bret Hart wearing pink, and you started seeing Adrian Adonis, who's like this big fat dumpy dude in a diaper, and he's got like makeup on, and you know Dusty Rhodes is wearing polka dots. You know, it's like, you know, you start seeing the cartoonish, quote unquote cartoonish levels of it. But what it did was it was an attempt to mine people for charisma who might not have, you know, been able to show it before. And I think it really worked for Ted DiBiase and some other people. Like there are other people who when they went elsewhere, like they stopped working in the territories. For starters, Paul Orndorff got huge when he left the WWF. When he left Mid-South. Like he's very svelte in Mid-South now. But when he went to the WWE, you know, he was kind of jacked. I think he was on the gas, you know. I think he gassed his car up, but that's not really the point. The point is, people, in order to stand out, you have to have charisma. And a lot of those guys really did not have charisma, and I did not see why they were over. You know, like Ted DiBiase in Mid-South. Like, yeah, he's a good wrestler, but I didn't see why anybody cared. You know, like he didn't specifically have anything to say. He didn't have a mission. He didn't have a character. He was just Ted DiBiase, or Ted DiBiase, as Bill Watts would call him. And he just seemed to blend in. It's like almost all of these guys just seem to blend together. Where now, you know, there's so many people, and yes, and to some degree, people kind of look the same, but there's more dynamic looking performers today, and not just racially and gender performers, but performers that, you know, some of them are chubby, most of them are somewhat in shape. But everybody didn't look like Greg the Hammer Valentine. So it's it's different. But I just kind of wanted to talk about this. You know, there's a lot of differences that I'm noticing watching wrestling in the 80s and thinking about how it compares to today. And I think that technology, because of high definition and stuff like that, and because it's a TV show, we are now leaning more towards aesthetically pleasing performers, people who look good, who are in shape, and maybe even looking at that more than whether they can cut a promo or whether they can talk or wrestle or, you know, that type of stuff. We're looking at, well, how do they look on TV? Because wrestling is now a TV show. But that's one of the major differences to me. So, but what did you guys think about wrestling in the 80s compared to today? I touched on a lot of different things that was not in this tweet. But I think that the technology of the business, how the business is presented, is not in smoky buildings anymore with the cameras far, far away. It is now in your face all the time, cameras everywhere. The presentation has to change. But there are things that they can learn from the 80s, like tightening up on a headlock and your headlock's not looking like shit. You know, and there's so much of that stuff going on. Those are the basics, you know. Like guys who can't do I think I was watching. It might have been. It was no doubt it was AEW, but they couldn't do a collar and elbow tie up. You know, basic shit like a basic collar and elbow tie up. They was trying to do complicated shit 10 minutes later, and motherfucker couldn't do a collar and elbow tie up. You know, like come on, man, tighten that shit up. The cameras are on you. The cameras are watching. This is not 1981. Like we can see that you suck today. You gotta make some contact. You gotta really get in. But what do you guys think? Leave your responses in the comment section. Like, share, subscribe, and I'll talk to you later.